Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war live stream, a news update, a military aid news update, the second major news one I've done today for the 9th of September 2025. I hope you are all well. Good to see Darren Corrigan in the chat, F. Oink, Kevin Forst, all these wonderful people, Mika Hiltonen, and so on and so forth. So what can I say before we start on military aid? Norway's had an election. Good to see that the Labour Party, Støre, got re-elected, fairly thin margin. Not from, I mean, I could talk about generic political stuff here, but from a Ukraine point of view, it is good news that Labour won because he's very strong on foreign policy. He's very strong on support for Ukraine. He's very strong on NATO. Jens Stoltenberg, who was a former NATO Secretary General, came back to the Labour Party. I think he's the finance minister. And that's really what shifted Labour back up partly. It was supposedly two things that shifted the Labour Party in Norway back to the top of the polls where they were really underwater. I believe it was looking to see what was going on in the United States, because basically in Norway you've had a right-wing populist party, not as bad as, say, AFD, a Norwegian version, but still a right-wing populist party that's overtaken the Conservative Party there. So the centre-right party overtaken by the right-wing populists, and they were then gaining. They were heading ahead in the polls. And then people started looking over to the United States saying, well, that's what it actually looks like. That's what this kind of politics looks like over there. And then Jens Stoltenberg came back from being NATO Secretary General and came back into the Labour Party. And those two things together, I think, pushed the right-wing populists down, Labour back up. But you still had Conservatives pushed into third position. And I think it's, 2-seat majority, and that's a coalition majority. It's not an outright majority because there are quite a number of parties. So I think Støre, the reigning Labour leader there, will have to have a coalition of 5 separate parties, 4 much smaller ones, and his. And that might be quite difficult to manage on a wafer-thin margin of 2 seats. But so it's good that he won, and I think he's really, really, I like him a lot as a leader, as a person. But it's good for Ukraine. But it's also reflective of modern politics, which is the rise of the populist right, and that is a challenge to Ukraine. I mean, you might be a member of the populist right on account of immigration being a massive thing for you. And I'm not saying immigration isn't a massive thing. Every political party now has to deal robustly with immigration. You either have to give a narrative that's really for it, or a narrative that's either very much against it or very much against due process and being strict on the rules that already exist. But I don't think you can put it to the back burner and hope it goes away. Immigration is here to stay as a major issue, and I think it's going to drive every single election going forward. Pretty much most Western countries, most developed nations, which will attract people to them because they are developed nations with higher chances for people to succeed in life. So I think the Norwegian elections, though, I think have gone fairly well for keeping a something like stability in terms of foreign policy going, that is reflective of the challenges going forward for all of Europe. And we can see that happen in the UK. Anyway, so that's good. So good news for Norway there. And the other bit of news I was just going to tell you before I get into, this is all preamble before I get to the military aid, is this quite interesting news piece that's just come out. So Germany, a Russian spy ship has been seized in the Kiel Canal. German special forces boarded the freighter Scanlark in the Kiel Canal and uncovering espionage equipment on board. Investigators suspect the vessel was used by Russia to launch drones over critical infrastructure. According to authorities, a drone had already been deployed on August 26, 2025 to monitor a German Navy ship. The 40-year-old vessel, officially sailing under the flag of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, is linked to the Estonian operator while the crew is Russian. That's, I'm sure, happening an awful lot, and I'm really glad that Germany has picked that up, because I think Russia is at war with Europe and the US, whether we like to admit it or not. And Friedrich Merz is actually really forward in admitting that this is a problem that they are having to deal with, that Germany is at war with them. Pantalones Grandes says populism has a set of narratives shaped by Russia in 20 years. Now that is exposed. I would expect populism to drop. However, it's not going to drop. It's so much easier to sell fear and otherization of people than it is to sell unity. So it won't drop because it's just too easy a narrative to spread. Right. Okay. Now, that's again not to say that there aren't genuine issues with immigration. I'm not being some kind of massively pro-immigration person here. My theories, as I'm sure you know if you've watched me enough, is that it's bloody complicated. I'm not even sure what my views on immigration are, because I can build up really positive economic arguments and actually some social arguments for immigration. And I can also build up some social arguments and some economic arguments against immigration. And, you know, so on and so forth. So it's difficult. It's complicated. Anyway, we're going to go to military aid news. And Scruffy, if Scruffy is here, right, I wanted to do, hey Scruffy. So go and check out Scruffy Tales of Warzone on YouTube. He's got a mapping update, and I was just preparing. The reason I'm doing this wasn't planned. I was going to do my mapping update, but the automation that synthesizes my Syriac maps and Andrew Perpetua's map has screwed up Syriac maps in the key area that I want Pokrovsk, and I can't do the mapping update, and it's really bloody annoying. And I've just spent like 2 hours anyway trying to sort that out. Scruffy, I've also been trying to find out a decent Ukraine fortification map in the Pokrovsk area. You showed it, but it was quite blurred on your one, so I don't know where the key original map is to the one where it showed the pockets of areas where the Ukrainians had not built fortifications that might show that they were inviting the Russians into the weaknesses in their defensive infrastructure so that they could then attack them. That map that you were showing, I'd love to get the original for that. Anyway, that's by the by, but go and check out Scruffy Tales because he's got, and it's looking quite good news in Pokrovsk at the moment. So there is that. Right. Let's start my video. Now, I've been speaking for 8 minutes. A Ukrainian defense delegation has arrived in London for the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. So that's Ramstein. Defense Minister Shmyhal said, of course, he used to be the Prime Minister, he's now Defense Minister, said key priorities are securing uninterrupted military and financial aid. So there are claims today that actually the military is 300 million something. I can't remember if it's dollars or hryvnias. 200 million is a lot. They are basically short of money for generally, I think, paying for the military this year. So they're scrabbling around trying to find money. But anyway, uninterrupted military and financial aid, strengthening air defense, and developing joint defense production. We're going to be talking about aspects of all of that going forward. I've told you this before, but UK StarMet announces a coalition of willing partners will supply Ukraine with long-range missiles capable of striking deep into Russia. Long-range missiles are key. Now, there's this Nightfall missile that the UK has talked about, or it's been rumoured. That, of course, our long-range missiles, I mean, we've got the Storm Shadow, but we're not really building that at the moment. There were some rumours about restarting the manufacturing of that, but I think it was just basically a midlife upgrades for the existing ones we have to make them, fit for purpose still. So new missiles aren't realistically going to come online for a year or so, I would have thought. So some of this might be, we're going to provide that. It could be a long-term thing. I don't know. It's a bit vague. The shift comes as partners acknowledge Putin cannot be trusted and pressure must increase to end the war, which is definitely right. Now, we know Germany are helping the manufacturing of Ukrainian long-range weapons. I'm also going to throw this out there now. I was going to do this later, but Ukraine's Brave One defense cluster has launched new grant competitions for tactical ballistic missiles. So grant competition, this is actually what the British did about, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, a year ago. They were looking at the war in Ukraine saying, we are lacking missiles. And also we want to help get some to Ukraine. So that Nightfall missile might be as a result of the UK doing this same thing, saying these are the specifications we want. Who out there can build us this? And putting it much more out into the open as a kind of like invitation. But this is what Brave One is doing: launch a new grant competition for tactical ballistic missiles and air defense systems against drones. So they're obviously the two things that they really want to sort out. Ballistic missiles to hit Russia and defense against drones. The program aims to boost private missile production, long-range strike capabilities, and air defense. Developers can secure over 100 million Ukrainian hryvnias in funding. So that's that, and that fits alongside this. They just need lots of missiles, especially when you look at the success from just one night, right? They sent a bunch of missiles into Donetsk. I did that breaking news update. They appear to be using some missiles against hydrocarbon infrastructure as well at the moment, and that's great. That's what you want. That's how Ukraine wins a war, is by crippling Russia's economy and striking deep without having to sacrifice any soldiers. Realistically, what you'd like to do is have their soldiers sitting in the barracks drinking tea while they're just throwing drones and missiles at the Russians willy-nilly, right? That's not particularly realistic, but essentially that's what I've been saying since the beginning of the war. You fight the war from a distance at arm's length, and you don't lose your people, because your biggest vulnerability, your biggest weakness, is your lack of personnel. Anyway, I'm starting to digress. So, Belgium Foreign Minister Maxime Prévost, as I said yesterday, but it's relevant for this video, is saying that using fully confiscated frozen Russian assets of $200 billion worth, or euros worth, actually more than that, in dollars, frozen funds in Belgium's Euroclear system can't be or won't be used won't be given wholesale to the Ukrainians. He's saying that he warned it would undermine trust in the euro and damage the credibility of European financial services. So that looks like that's not going to happen, even though there's a lot of pressure from a lot of people to do that. As I keep saying, I can make an argument for that, but also against that, because Ukraine has already received over 10 billion euros from Europe already, and then all the other bits from the US, UK, Canada, and Japan by skimming off the profits. And although they're not getting a massive dollop of cash or assets now, they are getting consistent assets that is then you can maintain that, you can sustain that. And then after the war, you've still got those frozen Russian assets that, if push comes to shove and Russia don't give reparations to Ukraine, you can give them to Ukraine as reparations, or continue skimming off the top of them to help with the reparations ad infinitum, right? So, I know lots of people are massive fans of giving a whole lot to Ukraine now, but I'm slightly okay with them not being given all of it now. I think you guys are getting to know the dark, cobweb-covered corridors of my inner thinking these days. I think you can probably guess what I'm going to say next and how I'm going to say it, especially if you watch most of my videos daily. Right, but thank you for that. The EU has delivered 80% of the promised shells to Ukraine, according to Kaja Kallas. We aim for 100% by October. And just to let those people know who aren't too au fait with the Gregorian calendar, we're in September at the moment. And so that's not far away. In fact, by October means they're going to get 20% of their pledges in 21 days or so. Wow. So that's the 2 million pledged artillery shells. So what, 80% of 1 million will be 800,000. So that is 400,000 shells in 20 odd days. That's pretty mad if that's true. I can't see that being the case. Anyway, there you go. Now, I reported this in my hits and losses. Ukraine risks running out of air defense due to delays in deliveries from the US, according to Financial Times. The situation worsened after the Pentagon directive in June. Our good friend, the cheese, Elbridge Colby, which caused deliveries to become irregular and smaller. Particular concern is raised by gaps between batches of missiles purchased under the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. So USAI is where you order, or the US orders directly from their military industrial complex on behalf of Ukraine, order stuff for Ukraine. with the USAI funding. Now, some of that is still coming through. Indeed, we're going to come to this in a second. So the US still got contracts, I think, in place for stuff probably under the Biden administration, because it takes a long time to build things, and when you depends how much you prioritize it up the kind of queue for stuff that's being built for the world. But as well as delays to the transfer of American Patriot, Stinger, Hellfire, and AIM missiles, European countries have begun forming aid packages from their own stocks and are making purchases in the US, but these supplies are still arriving partially in dribs and drabs, I guess. So Christopher Miller here from the FT says Ukraine is at risk of shortages of air defense weapons after a US DOD, DOW now, a DOD review of military aid in June resulted in slower deliveries. The review, stemming from a memo written by Pentagon's Elbridge Colby, remains in effect even as Moscow intensifies attacks. Thanks, Colby. Oh, damn good cup of tea there. I needed that. It's only my second of the day. Goodness. Right. Okay. Good news here, because I think these look pretty useful. You've seen the let's show you the Skynex from Rheinmetall, and Skynex is this, or the Sky Shield. Is this the version? Let's see. I want to go to the actual website. Oh, what have you done? No, it's what happens when you search on Bing. No, sod off. Right, okay. It's all gone wrong. So I didn't want Sky Shield. I wanted Skynex. I'm sure that's what it is. Truck mounted engaging drone swarm. That's the bad boy. Okay, new Skynex video. So these are the modular ones on a platform that you can put on the back of a truck, or just plonk it down next to some kind of high value target, and you can operate this remotely. I think it might have autonomous capabilities, but anyway, I think it's generally remotely controlled from separate from it. Let's see if this video shows us. And these are super useful. Now, they have a couple of these that were possibly prototype at the beginning of the war, or not at the beginning of the war, earlier on in the war, maybe, I don't know, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, they started to get these bad boys in. Then the Germans, Rheinmetall, started developing or putting it on the Leopard 1 chassis. So this is the old Leopard chassis tank, and of course they've got probably a bunch of these. In fact, interesting, aren't they trying to buy back 96 of them off the Swiss, but they can't go to Ukraine? But I wonder if there's some kind of loophole where they can turn them into something else, and that can go to Ukraine. So we're not going to send a tank to Ukraine, the Leopard 1A6 or whatever it is, 1A5. We're not going to send that tank to Ukraine, but we're going to put this this Sky Ranger turret on top that turns it into a mobile version of that palletized thing that we were just looking at. Anyway, however they're going to make them, Ukraine is signing a contract today for a 3-digit million sum. So that's a lot of money for the Sky Ranger SPAG, self-propelled anti-aircraft guns. Deliveries are scheduled to start this year. Now, with these, let's see what German to Ukraine says. Given that the deliveries are scheduled to start very soon, I think it's very possible they actually deliver the Sky Ranger 35 turret mounted on the Leopard 1 chassis, as it was tested a while back. Sky Ranger 35 mounted on Leopard 1 chassis promo video from Rheinmetall. So there might be another version of this that is more updated with a more updated chassis, but this is it on the Leopard 1 chassis. What is going wrong? It's not liking going into full screen. Oh, well, you just kind of look at that as a small video there. So that has, by all accounts, the ability to kind of close out the skies to drones in a 4x4 kilometer square. And I don't know how many a 3-digit million contract will get them, but you start putting these around some of the key the key installations in Ukraine around some of the military industrial complexes, and you start having some really good air defense capabilities, because these bad boys can fire a whole bunch of lead into the air at a rate of knots. So if you see there, like this, and when you see the bullets taking out this drone, they all look like proximity fuses that just shred the drone, as far as I can work out. So proximity rounds. But anyway, they're getting a whole bunch of them, and that looks pretty good. Oh, look, I did have that video here. German Rheinmetall announced a new large-scale contract with Ukraine. According to the words of the general director of the company, until the end of this year, Ukraine will receive the first batch of Skyranger mobile air anti-aircraft defense systems for protection against drones. Be signed on Wednesday, the contract. So that's actually tomorrow at the DSEI Defence Exhibition in London. They've also got Ramstein in London as well. So they're obviously trying to piece those things together. So you get all of the defence people going over to London anyway. So you might as well hold Ramstein as well. The exact number of the modification of the Skyranger that they will receive has not yet been disclosed. Yeah, I think that that's a great option for Ukraine. They're also going to go to the US now, and this is great news, but I don't know whether this was something signed under Biden. Pentagon has signed a contract for the production and purchase of 65 MSFV armored personnel carriers for Ukraine under the USAI program. So that is the ability to order stuff for Ukraine from defense manufacturers in the US, or it doesn't have to be in the US, but generally will be. Now, if Trump has given this the say so, if the Trump Pentagon has done this, then that's significant, because they haven't really done this previously. The vehicles must be produced and delivered within 3 years. So anyway, yeah, some armored personnel carriers, MSFV, APC. We can see what these are: Mobile Strike Force vehicle, and they look pretty simple, to be honest. And I don't know if, yeah, so that's what they look like. It's 4x4 armored vehicle developed by Textron Marine and Land Systems for the Afghan National Army under the US Army's MSFV program. So yeah, there you go. They were first began fielding them in 2012. So look, fairly basic APCs, but that'd be super useful. Nice bit of armament on top, though, that would help. But I don't know what variant the Ukrainians would receive. But that is possibly a step change for the Americans to be signing new USAI contracts, if indeed it is, from the last 7 months. Now, sticking on the US, they are negotiating with Ukraine a big old contract, negotiating a major deal worth about $100 billion. That's a lot of money, according to NBC News. Now, Ukraine will be able to buy American weapons, and the United States will receive intellectual property rights to advance Ukrainian military development. Now, the Ukrainians at the moment are on a cutting edge of military developments, whether it's something like the Delta system used for live feeds from the front line and organizing your troops. That's, I'm sure, something that the Americans would like to have a little look at. And then, of course, all the drones that they are producing, that drone technology, where Ukraine really are at the forefront. The US is going to want to have a piece of that. And so I don't know what $100 billion deal means. Like, that might not be like $100 billion going just one way. So it might be a deal that's worth in total, depending on how you look at it from both sides. Who knows? But anyway, a big deal is being done between the US and Ukraine. Obviously, US, as we keep hearing from Trump, is very keen to sell stuff to European allies and Ukraine. Not so keen to give stuff, although we've just seen 65 vehicles on the way, so that's good. Now, the US will supply Ukraine with 840 ERAM long-range cruise missiles by October 2026. So we're starting to get an idea of when these are going to go. Part of a larger deal, clear for up to 3,550. But if they're only going to get 840 by October 2026, don't expect these anytime soon. So if this war gets wrapped up by, say, I don't know, March next year, actually they would have had a couple of hundred of them to play around with, probably. So this is more of a long-term thing, although it'd be nice if they could just build them all right now and give them to Ukraine right now. The missiles, compatible with both F-16s and MiG-29s, mark a major step in the fast-track weapons development and mass production. But yeah, don't expect them too soon in large quantities. Right, Donald Trump is to rewrite the 1987 Missile Limitation Treaty to allow export of MQ-9 Reaper drones. So these are the famous drones you see in most of the films, and Americans use these a lot. You know, that you can operate them from, goodness me, from different countries. So the British ones will be, I've seen, is it the top? Yeah, it is the Channel 4 series, something like Top Gun, something or rather, and it follows the RAF. And they just had the second season of that on UK TV, and it's showing, you know, involvement from our Typhoons taking off from, usually from Cyprus, I think, maybe Romania as well, I don't know, but certainly Cyprus, to help out with and our rivet joints that fly, which are the kind of AWACS planes, fly from the UK all the way to the Black Sea, and they get accompanied by the Typhoons from Cyprus. Then they do their patrolling the Black Sea, and then a rivet joint will go all the way back to the UK and Typhoons back to Cyprus. And then they had like strikes in Iran when Iran was sending all those missiles to Israel first time, and the UK pilots were shooting some of those missiles down. That was also filmed. And then it had some film of the drone pilots operating this from, you know, the other countries, and the drones will take off obviously nearby and get used for X, Y, and Z. But the Americans are obviously big on their MQ-9s, and in fact they were offering, I don't know if it's the MQ-9, might be an earlier variant, but they were offering Ukraine these for something like $2 a piece. Obviously, you know, you take them on, you're going to have then a whole logistics and maintenance schedule that they'll make money from. But they were offering these at absolutely knockdown prices for Ukraine much earlier on in the war, and they didn't take them. But it could be because of something like this, because they are treated as missiles rather than drones, and that might make it much more difficult for the US to allow them to go to Ukraine. So Trump's to rewrite the 1987 Missile Limitation Treaty to allow the export of the MQ-9 Reaper drones and other attack drones. A new interpretation would allow the US to classify the drones as aircraft, like the F-16, rather than missile systems, and therefore, you know, they might have different restrictions. That would pave the way for sales of more than 100 drones to Saudi Arabia in our $142 billion deal, as well as to allies in Europe and the Pacific. You may end up getting some MQ-9s operating rather like the Bayraktar TB2s in Ukraine, particularly around the Black Sea. That's where the Bayraktars are. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense has received quadcopters from the Danish Refugee Council to support mine clearance for the demining quality control teams. We'll use them while working in areas cleared of mines and other explosive remnants of war. So that's awesome. Thank you very much, Denmark, as ever. Then we're going to go to Eurominded Press. You always know it's Eurominded Press because it's covered in adverts. Azerbaijani MiG-29s enter Ukrainian service as regional alliance shifts. Now, I have already reported on this. There's just a little more meat on the bones here from the Eurominded Press team. New images suggest Ukraine has quietly integrated Azerbaijani MiG-29 fighters into combat operations, potentially expanding Kyiv's air capabilities just as Baku distances itself from Moscow. And indeed, things are getting worse between Azerbaijan and Moscow as of today and yesterday. More geopolitical shenanigans going on between the two countries, but I won't digress there. So they may have replenished their fleet, the Ukrainians, of MiG-29s with aircraft from Azerbaijan, the war zone reports. A photo appeared on social media showing the single-seat Ukrainian Air Force MiG-29 with a camouflage pattern characteristic of Azerbaijani jets. So they used the Ukrainian Air Force has used MiG-29 aircraft in a recent operation in Russia's Kursk Oblast, destroying Russian drone teams with American-made SDB, small diameter bombs. Kyiv is also testing a new domestic analog of the Russian UMPK kit, a guided bomb or so-called CARB, which is installed on MiG-29 jets. Such a bomb can glide up to 60 kilometers. That's a bit of an aside there. So MiG-29s, the point being that MiG-29s are still, even though they're old planes, are still being used almost as like the backbone of what the Ukrainians are doing when they're delivering a lot of their weapons systems, particularly to the front lines. So yeah, they're not going to be carrying cruise missiles and whatnot, but they are the planes that seem to be going on these bombing runs and using, you know, probably AASM Hammer, the French guided glide bombs, the American SDBs and GBUs, and then possibly now Ukrainian versions. But back in the summer of 2022, another photo appeared on Twitter showing 3 Azerbaijani jets, MiG-29s, undergoing repairs in Lviv. And that's obviously the start of the war. And they couldn't get the jets out of Lviv. And so it looks like those jets, at least, have ended up in the Ukrainian hands. It seems the aircraft, or at least one of them, survived the March 2022 Russian attack on the Lviv State Aviation Repair Plant. So they could have lost some in the initial attacks when the Russians did do some limited SEAD, DEAD. So suppression of enemy air defense, destruction of enemy air defense. It's what you do when you start a war, essentially, except Russia didn't do it for very long. But they really should have just spent, because they weren't expecting an actual war. So they didn't expect the Ukrainians to fight back. So they just did some very limited degrading of Ukrainian air defenses and trying to hit Ukrainian air bases to take out some planes, but thinking, well, we don't want to destroy everything, because when we take over Ukraine, when we have a puppet government, then we're going to need those aircraft and the infrastructure and the military stuff. So we don't want to destroy everything. It turns out that they accidentally got embroiled in a war and they hadn't done that DEAD, SEAD stuff. And so it came back and bit them on the arse, because you've still got contested airspace. And indeed, you might argue that Ukraine is wresting some advantage back. So we're seeing Crimea being degraded for air defense. They're doing their own SEAD, DEAD, or whatever you want to call it, operations on Crimea. They're also using guided glide bombs quite a lot on the front line up in Sumy area. In the east to some degree as well. The Russians are doing this too, but there is an element of the Ukrainians just slightly getting a bit further forward, I get a sense of. The plant was a key facility for overhauling MiG-29s, not only for Ukraine, but also foreign clients, including Azerbaijan. There are also suggestions that Azerbaijan may have provided Ukraine with other unofficial assistance, precision bombs, mortars, and fuel. Azerbaijan's MiG-29 fleet itself originally came from Ukraine. In 2007, the country acquired about 15 aircraft after major overhaul and modernization. So that's really good news. What we'd like to see is more of that. Thank you very much. Obviously, Azerbaijan are not fans of Russia at the moment, and it kind of stemmed, or at least it was exacerbated by the shooting down of the Azerbaijani airlines plane over Grozny by the Russians, and then that leaked audio footage of the Russian air defense team kind of admitting to it. Okay. Oh, this is out of position. So this is Thomas Tyner having a go at Elbridge Colby, saying that he's working to help Putin invade Europe. Every anti-Europe decision, every anti-Ukraine decision, every anti-NATO decision in the Pentagon is Colby working to undermine Europe and weaken it so it will be unable to resist a Russian invasion. So this is the news that Pentagon officials last week informed European diplomats that the US would no longer fund programs that train and equip militaries along Russia's border in Eastern Europe. So this is saying that Elbridge Colby is responsible for the US decision, for the Pentagon decision to no longer fund military support for the Baltic nations and for Eastern Europe as part of their let's keep Europe safe, to keep the economy stable, to keep our economy stable, and to keep us safe. So we're going to leave it all to the Europeans, which, yeah, as a long-term project, I don't necessarily have an issue with that, but like these decisions just come at the wrong time. It's like you would make these decisions if you wanted Russia to prevail. Like why you would do that right now, it just makes me think Elbridge Colby's on the wrong side. Now, Phillips O'Brien, the historian and military kind of strategy historian and whatnot, he was saying in his piece yesterday, I think, that people should stop blaming Elbridge Colby. This is Trump. This is on Trump. So he's like one to take it up to the ultimate, the person who's ultimately responsible, and Colby's doing what Trump wants type thing. But I'm not so sure. I think there's activity taking place in the Trump White House that basically Trump's not aware of. I guarantee that Trump wouldn't have gone into the Pentagon and said, "Do you know what I want? I want us to stop funding Estonia a little bit for some of their military hardware and so on and so forth." That's Trump. That's not coming from Trump. Trump will sign it off. That ideology won't be coming from Trump. So yeah, the US is winding down part of its military aid program for European countries bordering Russia. Pentagon informed allies it will no longer fund the training and the equipping of armies in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. This refers to a program that sent 1.6 billion to the region between 2018 and 2020. It's not a huge amount, all things being told. I mean, it's sad that 1.6 is a lot of money, right? But I'd like that. But that's arming and training 3 countries. That'll be a sore loss for those countries, though. At the same time, the foreign military financing program, which allows the purchase of major weapon systems, will remain in place, obviously. According to the Financial Times, the decision is linked to the policy of Pentagon advisor Elbridge Colby, who is pushing to reallocate resources toward the Indo-Pacific region and containing China. He's a massive China hawk, and that's where he wants all the American money to be going and all the focus to be going, really. Right, let's go and just see if I've missed out on any exciting conversations going on in the live. Yes, so Scruffy Tail says European armies should train them high quality training than the Americans anyway. Interesting, and yeah, I mean that's what will happen. And as I say, I'm not against that happening. I think it's not America's responsibility. It depends what America's geopolitical strategic goals are. And if your goals are to keep Europe safe from Russia, from the USSR, leftover of the Cold War type thing, then you might still want to be working on stuff like that. But if you're like, no, we're all right now, we still want that to happen, but the Europeans can take this over now, then that's fine. Yeah. And I think long term, yeah, absolutely. It's just like, why now? Right now, just when it's all going off. But there you go. Okay. Thank you very much to F Oink. Good to have you on board. Bit early, but go sponsor the little whiskey shop. Yes, indeed. I was talking to Mark from the little whiskey shop as we drove over to Ukraine together last time we went to Ukraine, and I'll try and support the little whiskey shop as much as possible. But we do disagree politically on a lot of things. And we're having a discussion on Angela Rayner and her resignation the other day. Kevin Forst, thank you for. That's not going to stop me supporting his little whiskey shop. Kevin Forst, thank you for the ATP Geopolitics memberships. You total legend, you. And thanks to Johnny Nevercard for some Norwegian love. And I was speaking about my love for Norway. So talking about Støre, the Prime Minister, Prime Minister of Norway. There's a really good interview of him from a week ago on The Rest is Politics, and it is brilliant. So I advise you go and watch that, and you get a really good sense of who he is, what sort of person he is. And that's the kind of politician, that kind of decent human being who's a technocrat, he's an expert. He knows what he's talking about. He's not some kind of populist, let's burn everything to the ground. It's like, this is who I am, this is what I appreciate, and I'm going to get on and do this work. I just we denigrate kind of solid, responsible politicians. It's really interesting. I'm going to show you this. Dagnammit, I am going to show you this because I was reading some of the comments to the video, and if you're Norwegian in the chat here, I think this kind of sums Norway up in many ways. So let's go and find it. Here you are. There you are. Okay, so here is the interview, man standing between Trump and the Nobel Peace Prize, Prime Minister of Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre. And some of these, I think this sums it up. I'm Norwegian. When I was listening, I felt that it was just common sense. Therefore, maybe a little boring for people listening to Støre, because he's just pretty sensible, right? But when I read the comments, I realize that common sense is just what people miss. Amen. Amen, brother. Like, we just sensible, common sense approach to governance. It's all like everything has to be flashy and burn it all to the ground. And oh my God, everything's terrible. Let's go and just destroy everything. No, just sensible, common sense. Sweden here. Thank you, Norway, for being such a good friend, partner, and ally and neighbour. I'm not born in Sweden, in Croatia, but living here since I was a boy. I truly love Sweden, the people, culture, etc. I'd give my life protecting Sweden if that's what's needed to happen. So, yeah, appreciation from Sweden. How refreshing to listen to this intelligent, articulate, decent man, someone who brings balance and real wisdom to the discussion. Impressive. I want to go and live in Norway. Something I like about Story, he's a wealthy man. His family owns a largish business, yet he fights for higher taxes on himself. And actually, one of the areas of division in Norway over the election was he brought in a wealth tax for the super rich. And there were these claims that the rich were leaving Norway and it wouldn't attract investment. And that's been one of the dividing points. But from him to be a rich person, or richer person himself, saying, no, actually, and one thing that happens in the Nordic states is they have regulation to stop there being too much disparity between the CEOs of companies and the workers of companies. And so the wealth inequality and income inequality in the Nordic nations is among the best in the world, if not the best in the world. And there is, although there's a correlation, there's probably causation going on here. There's a correlation between wealth inequality gap and the welfare system, and therefore the tax burden, but also the happiness, the contentment. So the Nordic nations finish at the top of the World Happiness Report year on year, routinely. And so, you look at some of these things, and yeah, that's actually, as a Dane who has lived most of my life in Norway, I would claim this is the best country in the world. The other Nordic countries are not far behind. We who live in the Nordic countries have won the lottery regarding where we live, and this is true. So Norway has got to where it is on account of it has huge amounts of resources. And I'm going to link this back to military aid in a second. So this isn't just a wild, fanciful rabbit hole. But there is a lottery that you win if you're going to be born in a place like this, because they have those huge oil and gas deposits. That Norway made the correct decision to then turn that, to take a cut into that as the nation, and they are absolutely raking it in now to the point where, like, the richest country in the world, or one of the, they've got, some are saying they've got too much money that actually it can mess around with certain other metrics, but they put that money into sovereign wealth fund, and then it pays for pensions and so on and so forth. The UK decided not to do that. We went down the free market. Yeah, don't want the government to overstretch. So, Shell and BP and whatever, you can come and have the oil and gas. And then, 50 years later, we're like, oh, where's all that? Oh, they've taken it offshore. Oh, we can't even tax them because they've gone and they put it over there. And, whereas if we had said we're going to have some of that for our sovereign wealth fund, we'll be in a much better position. So, when you look at what Norway are now doing to support Ukraine, they are, if we look at the Keel tracker, then Keel Institute support, Ukraine support tracker, we can guess that Norway are going to be pretty much near the top, as certainly as a percentage of GDP. So if we look at government support for Ukraine by donor country, GDP, Denmark, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Sweden, Finland, Netherlands, Poland. Oh, where's Norway? Just been talking about how wonderful Norway is. Norway's not in the EU. That's why they're not there. Norway's not a full member of the EU. So yes, so government support to Ukraine, type of assistance. This is in real terms in the billion, right? So Norway comes in. It goes to the US, EU. So this is EU only, not like amount of money from countries within the EU unilaterally to Ukraine. So US, EU, Germany, UK, Japan, Canada, Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden, France, Norway. So Norway is a relatively small country with population, and for that to be up here is incredible for Norway. Now, if we saw it as a percentage of GDP, I'd be really interested to see where it sat in the EU countries there. But Norway has the ability to help out a lot more because it it has this sovereign wealth fund that allows it to do things like that. And it has that because the government decided to take a cut in the natural resources. And that, some people might say that that is not free market and therefore that sucks, blah, blah, blah. But no, I'm like, yep, that's exactly what I would like the UK to have done. And Norway, you know, they're doing very well, thank you very much, as a result of having made that decision. Government support to Ukraine allocated versus dispersed budget in billions. And then Norway, look here, EU institutions, United States, Japan, Canada, United Kingdom, Norway. It's just pretty incredible. So 1.6 allocated budgetary support there, you know, is for this particular time frame. You know, they are up there. Norway, what I'm trying to say is just Norway are doing a damn good job of supporting Ukraine. Now, some people say they could support even more, but they have certainly upped their the amount of money that's going to Ukraine. In fact, did they not triple it? I think so the Labour government that has been in power, they were going to give something like 3 billion, and then the opposition said, no, you need to do much better than that, and it needs to be doubled. And in the end, I think it was tripled. So you know, Ukraine are receiving something like 8 to 9 billion or something this year from Norway, which has got a relatively tiny population. Anyway, stop being so kind to Norway. You've had enough kindness from me today. Common sense is a rare superpower nowadays, says F. Oink. I would tend to agree with you. I just think it's all about flashy politics that you know, people you need to make. I guess in this internet age that we live in, it's all about attention, and what's it? The attention economy or whatever it is. So everyone's vying for people's attention. I mean, that's what I'm doing with you guys. I'm vying for your attention. I don't like try to vie for your attention, because just watch my videos, me rambling on quasi nonsensically for an hour about a particular topic is not. It's a miracle you guys are here. But you know, when it comes to politics, like, how do you fight through all of the noise of social media and TV and streaming and all the movies and amazing series that come out all the time? Like, who has time to sit down? Who wants to sit down and watch the news these days? It's competing. All information is competing with all other information. How do you break through? And politicians have to think about that. Like, how are we going to break through to get ourselves heard? So you have to be like the most flashy and the most extreme and the most visible and the most and so that, I think, is a political landscape that favors your populists who are going to be at the extremes, whether it be left-wing populism or right-wing populism. And if you're like some boring centrist, then you're like, well, how am I going to fight through all this noise to shout about how I'm just going to be quite common sensible, full of common sense, and do things, you know, I'm not going to rip up these institutions, and I'm just going to sensibly make some tweaks here and do a bit of this there. And it's difficult to I think, win in the modern internet age. Anyway, that's just, again, me rambling. So Italian foreign minister said that the only effective mechanism for putting pressure on Russia may now be new financial sanctions. But in terms of security guarantees, Rome is offering an agreement similar to Article 5 of NATO, the NATO Charter. We've heard this from Maloney previously. A mutual defense pact that would guarantee Ukraine's security, including the USA, to protect skies. Now, like I've said to you many times before, the skies part of these agreements, if they ever come to pass, I think are going to be one of the most important ones. So if we can help defend Ukraine's skies, if you think how much destruction is brought upon Ukraine from Shahed drones and missiles, if we can kind of close the skies, then Ukraine could just get on and do whatever it's doing over there. Or, you know, I just think helping out with the skies over Ukraine is one of the biggest things that we can do. Now, the Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico said Slovakia will not send troops. That's been reiterated as he met the other day, but is ready to provide logistical support that the country's transport infrastructure could be used by partners if security guarantees for Ukraine are agreed. So that's good news because, of course, Slovakia, these countries that are nearby, if they're not too happy with supporting Ukraine with weapons and troops, are they going to be happy with allowing nations to pass through those countries with weapons and troops? So it's really important that Slovakia has said, hey, we're not going to provide troops, but you can use our country to come through to Ukraine. Deep State has said positions of some European countries on the participation in security guarantees for Ukraine are as follows. And I did say this the other day, but this is for the military aid video. Poland will not send its troops, will focus on logistical support. Romania will participate in peacekeeping missions only after a ceasefire is concluded, using its bases for logistics, so similar to Slovakia. Italy will also not send its troops to Ukraine. The country is ready to support through monitoring and training initiatives. Germany will focus on financing, arming and training AFU. The decision to send peacekeepers will be made in due time after determining the framework conditions. Croatia does not plan to send troops to Ukraine. It will continue to provide political, financial and military technical support. And Robert Fico from Slovakia said there's no talk of sending Slovak military personnel to Ukraine. Instead, the country is ready to provide logistical support. So that really leaves France and the UK. France is in a political maelstrom at the moment with Bayrou, the right-wing. Okay, very quickly on France. So they've dissolved parliament last night with a vote of no confidence for Bayrou and his government. They've had 9 months trying to sort out the budget in France. The budget's a nightmare. And Emmanuel Macron is a centrist, centre-right leader, right? And he keeps putting in these slightly right-wing or right-wing conservative prime ministers to try and enact his plan for fiscal reform and economic reform for the country, which is quite sensible. It kind of needs it. Like, there's a lot of borrowing going on in France, if I recall correctly, and they need to get a hold of their budget. But the problem is, like, the left is also very mobile in France, and any kind of designs to put up the retirement age or to like change taxes in this way or to do this or do that, the left then react against it. And the problem with France is you appear to have kind of the left quite strong, the centre sort of centre right quite strong, like a third, and now you've got this right-wing populist third as well, and no one can get on with each other. And so you keep having this dissolution of parliament and then having a new government being put in place by Macron, but it still has exactly the same problems as the last government had. But then he does keep choosing right-wing prime ministers. And what the left are now saying is, like, it's about time you chose a left-wing prime minister because it hasn't worked. But the problem there is, yeah, he probably would be wise to do that, but then it would be changing they would be less likely to enact his agenda, which is centre-right. And actually, you'll have all these other people. It's just so split that whoever you put in charge is not going to get the support of all the other people. And so France is just a nightmare. And then you're thinking, well, should he call another snap election? But then you'll probably just get to exactly the same place as you are now. And it seems rather intractable when it's split so solidly in these three different areas. Now, that's only my very naive understanding of French politics, so correct me if I'm wrong. But that is a problem, and he's so important, Emmanuel Macron, for what's going on in Ukraine that in fact we'll go to him next. So Emmanuel Macron the other day said roughly 60 to 70% of all weapons currently used are made in Ukraine. Wow, so that's impressive. A coalition of 35 countries will annually allocate funds for defense of Ukraine. Of these, 26 countries are ready to provide their contingent. So that's kind of building on from security guarantee stuff. This is now on to, but really this is the Ukraine indigenous production section of the video. So 60-70% of weapons currently used are made in Ukraine. A Ukrainian drone firm, I find this fascinating, is opening a $250 million factory and training site in rural England, right as Lotus car maker sheds 550 jobs nearby. So this is in Suffolk, I believe, in East Anglia, so that eastern bulge of the UK. At the bottom half of that, it's very rural, somewhat backwards. I was speaking to someone the other night in a pub who used to live in Suffolk. He was like, it's really interesting, Suffolk, because even though it's relatively close to London, it's like 20 years behind the rest of the UK. That's what his interpretation was. No offense to anyone living in Suffolk, but he felt that actually I've got relatives that live there. But there you go. Anyway, what's interesting here is that Ukraine might be coming to the economic aid of the UK, whereas like we desperately need inward investment. Like at the moment, growth is an issue. The Labour government is absolutely, their success is contingent upon economic growth. All of their eggs are in that basket, and all of their other policies depend on economic growth. So if it doesn't happen, they're screwed. And if Lotus is suddenly shedding jobs because no one's buying Lotuses at the moment, which is a very niche part of the car industry, then Ukraine coming along and setting up a $250 million factory in Suffolk is like, oh yeah, Ukraine coming to the UK's help. So there you go. So that is good news for both Ukraine and the UK. Here's a decoy. I mean, it doesn't look much, does it? If you get close, you're thinking, what the hell? But of course, when you're 800 meters away, looking down with a grainy thermal imaging camera on an FPV drone, these do the job. But interesting, these Ukrainian decoy M777 155mm howitzers have heated barrels. You can see the solar unit there takes in power and then just gently heats up the barrels, so it gets picked up by Russian thermal cameras, so they see them during the day or night. Solar panel provides power during the day, batteries at night, and then it comes up, it contrasts on the thermal camera, and they send in the drones against it, and they're wasted because they're not really taking out the M777. It's amazing how much effort they're putting into these decoys, and that tells you that decoys are valuable in their own way. Right, in Kyiv, Ukraine's defense intelligence has unveiled a new high-speed boat or boats designed for special operations, more cost-effective than Western counterparts. The vessels are capable of reaching speeds of up to 150 kilometers an hour and can be equipped with Browning machine guns. So going back to sort of Ukraine building their own stuff, but also building facilities abroad, but also talking about how Ukraine are going to succeed and rebuild themselves after the war. There is a place for them in the international arms market. And if they can build decent kit at a fraction of the price, you're thinking, and we're going to go on to this in a second, by looking at, in fact, if I don't have it next, I do have it next, by looking at the Bogdana, right? So the Ukrainian Bogdana, the 4.0, now this Bogdana, if my figures are still correct, costs about half as much as a Caesar self-propelled gun from France. So although it might not be like all singing, all dancing compared to the Caesar might have its advantages here and there. Actually, this is probably marginally smaller, so it might have a bit of an advantage in sort of footprint. But is it twice as bad as a Caesar? Probably not. So would you rather two of these than one Caesar? Yes. And if you're any other nation looking at buying self-propelled guns in the world, I don't know, a nation that's not flush with huge amounts of the cash, you'd be like, yeah, it's a pretty decent gun. We'll buy 10 of those rather than 5 Caesars. Thank you very much. So after the war, Ukraine has the opportunity to really get itself on the arms export market here. When they're producing stuff, and I mean this is a fourth generation of the Bogdana by the looks of it, and they're improving it all the time. They're going to be getting constant feedback from the battlefield. We're now producing more than 30 of these a month. They're all going out to battlefield. The crews will be telling the makers of this, oh, you need to do that, you need to do this. Caesars, they are obviously getting used in Ukraine, but there won't be as many of them and won't be used as much, and the feedback might not go back to the French in that that really important way where you get constant feedback and then you are rethinking what you're making. The Ukraine is going to be doing that far more, I think, than the Caesar manufacturer. So I just think after the war is over, the Ukrainians do have a slight silver lining in the defense industry, at least. Drones, obviously, is another one. And talking of which, Ukrainian drone manufacturer Usprek Systems has announced a £200 million, $270 million investment in the, this is one aiming to build 11,000 square meter production. Sorry, I had this out of position, but actually this is more information on that drone facility. So let's share that with you then. So it's aiming to build 11,000 square meter production facility in Mildenhall and the testing and training centre in Elmset in Suffolk. The company plans to begin hiring British staff later this year, with up to 500 jobs and training programs to be created, while full-scale production is expected to start in the early 2026. Usspec Systems says I think they're going to have to change the name of that. Just call it U Systems, says the project will combine Ukraine's battle-tested drone expertise with the UK's industrial capacity, positioning the firm as a global leader in military and civilian drone systems and turning Britain into a key export hub. Of course, one of the main reasons they'll be doing this is because it will be safe from being hit by Russian missiles, right? So I was telling you the other day, and it was funny because Pierre Dupont, my friend Pierre, we went around Ukraine twice together. He was saying, I'm really glad you talked about this because I don't think people do enough, that Russia is hitting Ukraine's military-industrial complex. And when we have nights of, say, 30 drones getting through, 40 drones getting through, and you see a couple of residential buildings hit, and the main focus is on those residential buildings, well, what about the other 25 drones? What you aren't hearing is that they are actually hit. So we talk about, Russian war crimes very often and aiming for these big apartment blocks, but I don't think they always are aiming. In fact, I'd say more often than not, they're not aiming at, because it's kind of pointless. If you're going to spend all that money sending drones into Ukraine, you're going to want to be taking out their industrial facilities. But with some of these industrial facilities, or a lot of them, they are in urban areas. So you're flying over cities to go and hit something over there. So if you shoot them down, then it lands on these apartment blocks. So the Russians really are going to be aiming for a lot of manufacturing very, very frequently, and they are hitting it. So there are some claims that the reason why you haven't seen Ukrainian ballistic missiles and cruise missiles fired at the rates that we'd like them to see is because the Russians keep hitting the facilities, and that delays the manufacturing, the development and manufacturing of those missiles. And that is happening all the time. So every night the Russians are so, like we see so frequently, the Ukrainians hit the Russians' hydrocarbon sector. So frequently, the Russians are going to be hitting the Ukrainian military-industrial complex, and that is going to be hurting. That's why you see this company. This company doesn't want to go and set up in the UK. They don't want to spend £200 million worth of Ukrainian money in the UK with higher labour costs, higher energy costs, higher resource costs. No, it's doing that because it won't get blown up. That's the reason they're setting up in Suffolk. Might get a couple of cowpats on it, but it's not going to get, hopefully, a missile. So the initiative has the backing of the UK Ministry of Defence, obviously, which highlighted the benefits of access to advanced technologies and stronger defence capabilities. So that's really good news. I'm liking that from a British point of view. Fabian Hoffman says, I published a new Missile Matters post today. So he's a missile expert offering a battle damage assessment of the Flamingo. So I talked about this a little bit the other day, the Flamingo cruise missile that was used to strike at a facility in Crimea, and it hit the facility, the first missile, the kind of corner of the whole compound, taking out most of the big building. And then another one hit in the sea, and I think shrapnel took out a bunch of hovercraft, and another one hit in the sea very close to the facility, and another one hit outside the facility. So we'll go on and look at this. Proof of concept was established, but the strike also revealed shortcomings. Okay, high-resolution satellite imagery shows 2 impact points, depending on the nominal aim points. Missile 1 probably missed by 15 to 40 meters. Missile 2 by 80 to 200 meters. Missile 3 did not reach the target area, whether due to outside influence or internal failure. 5 points stated that the Flamingo has a CEP, so a circle error probable of 14 meters, meaning 50% of missiles should land within 14 meters of the aim point. But of course, 14 meters is quite a long way. It's going to do some shrapnel damage for sure. It's a bigger warhead, 1,150 kilograms. So it's going to damage it if it does hit within 14. But really, you want to hit the thing directly. So 14 is okay. It's pretty good, but it's not the best. Like HIMARS, the normal HIMARS missiles, I forget what the designation is, will hit like on 1 meter, right? About 93% within 28 meters, and the remainder outside the 28-meter radius. Wow. So this means that large misses, as seen in at least 1 and possibly 2 cases, are statistically to be expected. We should therefore be cautious about drawing too many conclusions, given the very small number of missiles launched so far. However, it's likely that the manufacturer and operators had hoped for somewhat better results, even if pinpoint accuracy was neither expected nor a design feature of the Flamingo. This is particularly true given the favorable conditions of the target location, which did not require Flamingo to penetrate deeply or overcome significant MD. So this is, I think, it's interesting that they use the Flamingo that supposedly has a range of 3,000 kilometers to hit Crimea, which is not 3,000 kilometers away. They're obviously testing it to make sure, to see what it can do. And they've degraded air defense around there so much that it's actually pretty favorable. So you can properly test to see whether it's just going to hit what you're aiming for. And it did to a degree, but not really as well as they were hoping, according to Hoffman. That said, the missile likely met minimum expectations, and the manufacturer can hopefully draw useful data from the launch. Sorry, it doesn't have the actual Flamingo. In fact, we can find that Flamingo satellite. If I can spell. Sorry to do this live, but it's just the way I roll. Okay, so this is exactly it. So that's what I wanted. Right, so this was 1 hit in the sea, as you can see there, and then 1 hit the corner of that building. You see that that crater there. So it did hit the compound, but I doubt it wanted to hit there. So saying, you know, some meters that way. So it was like somewhat accurate, but not wholly accurate. That's pretty inaccurate, and then the other one missed completely is the claim. But the theory was that one damaged a load of hovercraft that were nearby, and that's why they're saying 6 hovercraft were taken out. But anyway, yeah, that's that. Thank you to Fabian Hoffman for that analysis. And then we've talked about that. So now we're going on to Russia. So I'm amazed that you guys are still with me. Thank you, because I have just been wittering on here. Appreciate your consistent live chat support and whatnot. Okay, anything else of note in the live chat? Talk about Israel. Israel has lost its way. US is going there. What's going on in Gaza at the moment? Honestly, it's just insane. It's absolutely horrific. Yeah, not good. Anything else? Yeah, this is who's popping, saying European nations and Ukraine are investing into each other's military industrial complex, while Russia is making deals with China for energy exports to prop up their ailing economy. This is one of the positive points for Ukraine, is that they have this long-term support from allies in a way that Russia doesn't, right? Russia doesn't have people propping up their economy massively. They have China willing to sell them stuff and willing to buy stuff off them at knockdown prices, right? So China and India are kind of screwing Russia over. I know people like the US are saying, you know, they need to stop buying these oil products off Russia. But, you know, if you're a country of 1 billion people, you can understand the desire to buy absolutely knockdown priced hydrocarbons for your massive population. You know, in a sense, they are just using Russia in a way that we aren't using Ukraine. I mean, you can argue we are using Ukraine as our defense, right? They are the buffer for us, and we're supporting them because it's in our best interest. So there's kind of idea of us using Ukraine, but we're not like screwing Ukraine over so that we can get the best deal out of them. Like, we're giving them a lot of stuff. We're giving them a lot of funding to support their government. Now, there will be strings attached to that, of course, and there will be benefits for our nations in terms of investments and all sorts. But we're not trying to screw Ukraine over. We're trying to prop Ukraine up so they survive. China is not trying to do that with Russia, I wouldn't think. They'll be selling components to them for their drones, maybe to sort of help them strategically, but also just to make money off selling them stuff. And I think there's a categorical difference between. I think North Korea is a different one there. But again, I wonder if North Korea are screwing Russia over, because Russia is so desperate. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for the discussions between Kim Jong-un and Putin, where Putin says, I'd love you to give us like 15,000 troops. And North Korea goes, yeah, all right, but you're going to give us this. We're going to get, free oil and gas. We're going to get grain. We're going to get, do you know, like, it probably does come at quite a cost to Russia, although it's probably a cost they can quite easily afford if it's in terms of those resources. But yeah, so I wonder if the nations that help Russia just help them in a very different way, and there's a very different feel to the support that Russia gets compared to what Ukraine gets. Anyway, now going on to the final section. Mitch Mazzaro, thanks for kicking out the content, JP. Legendary effort. Participation in a virtual space makes a tangible difference on the ground. That said, thanks to the team as well. Yeah, team, thank you, mods and peeps and legends and all the people helping out. I really appreciate you, and thanks, Mitch. You are absolutely marvelous. Mitch, you'll be interested. So I mentioned this the other day, but you might not have caught it. I went to my local pub. So my friend, Dr. Caleb Lack, came over for. I used to write with Dr. Lack at Skeptic Inc. Network, and then Pathos, and then Only Sky. So all three places that I've written for, I've written with Dr. Lack, and I've edited books of his and stuff like that. But I've never met him. I've interviewed him a number of times, and we're friends, right? And he came over. He's spending a week in the UK with his 16-year-old son. So he came over, and it was a real honour for him to say, right, I'm coming to you first. So he came down to me in the South Coast. I took him out to Portchester Castle, which is my local castle. He's like, should we go to Carisbrooke Castle? It's on the other one. It's like, it's a full day out. You're going to be, nah. And then I forgot I've just got a castle down the road, because that's what happens in England. We just got castles all over the shop. I've got castles down the road. So he came down from Gatwick, took him out to Portchester Castle. So we got a castle before lunch. No, we went to a pub for lunch, where my mate came with us, and he's a psychotherapist, so he is really interested in the psychology of my mate, of Caleb Lack. Pub, castle, and then I took him back to. I live by the beach, so we went and had an ice cream down the beach. So I had a 99 flake, like classic English sort of ice cream, Mr. Whippy ice cream, sitting overlooking the Isle of Wight on the beach. And then took him back to his hotel, and then brought him back out at night. And we went down the pub, and the pub was packed. My local pub, which is like, what's it packed on a Saturday night? It's just a fairly crappy local pub. And it's packed. It's fish and chip nights. And they've got the Barnacles doing, which is the name of the band, doing a sea shanties gig. I'm like, so my mate's come over from the US, and he gets a pub lunch, a castle, ice cream on the beach, and then go to the local pub for fish and chips and the sea shanties. Like, I couldn't get any more quintessentially English. Anyway, Mitch, you're like this. This is all leading to also living locally to me are two really big YouTubers, much bigger than me in the skeptical niche. So Rationality Rules, Stephen Woodford, and Thomas Westbrook of Holy Kool-Aid. So these two big YouTubers, he's American actually, lives really locally to me, and both of them live really locally to me, but I've never met them before. So I was like, I contacted them, do you want to come to the pub? And so we had these YouTubers in the pub. I was just made up. It's just like, so Mitch, you would have loved it. The conversation we were talking about, you can imagine, with Rationality Rules and Holy Kool-Aid. But anyway, that's because Mitch was with me on my previous incarnation as a YouTuber, as a philosophical YouTuber. Right. Anyway, that's not interesting at all. That was a digression that I'm sure nobody really wanted to hear, apart from Mitch. Okay, so we're on to Russian stuff now. So Russian missile hit the government cabinet ministers building the other night. And we hear that missile had sort of 35 or so components. There were 30 from the US, one from the UK, one from Japan, one from somewhere else, Switzerland or something like that, I think it was. But most of them from the US. So still in that missile. It was an Iskander-K missile. So the US still having loads of components finding their way to these Russian missiles. But it was announced that there was fewer components, Western components, there used to be. So that's really good. What was also announced by the guy that was talking about this is that it didn't explode. So that was good. But I think it didn't explode because it might have been hit by air defense. So the slamming of that missile into the government building might not have been intentional by the Russians. And it doesn't fit in with what they've done. So that would have been a marked difference. And if you're going to take that building out, I would have thought you're going to completely take it out, or at least, I don't know. So my thought was it probably was air defense that took that missile out of, took that missile away from hitting what it was planning on hitting. Because they have been wary about taking out government buildings, not in other places like Kherson and Odessa and places like that, or not sure about Odessa, but certainly Kherson, where they've actually used things like artillery and guided glide bombs to do the work there, but guided glide bombs mainly. Here, obviously, they're not going to use guided glide bombs, but I just don't think it fits in with what the Russians have been trying to do, because they could have done that ages ago and they haven't. So I do think, and it's probably quite controversial because people would like to see Russia's so evil that they'll be aiming for the government building. But I just don't think they were. And I think Vasyuk, who came out and said that, Vladyuk, seemed to say that it didn't explode because it was hit by air defense, and the fire that started was a result of the fuel from the missile. But talking about Russian missiles, this year Russia plans to produce 2,500 high-precision missiles. Now, have I got it here? Yeah, I'm going to bring this in. I showed you this morning, but this is worth looking at because they haven't really been sending all that many missiles, not for a long time. And in fact, I showed you this morning from Dell's stats that I think is worth looking at, because it gives you an indication of how frequently they are sending large amounts of missiles. This is the cruise missile one itself. And you can see that they aren't sending these large numbers of missiles like they used to. They're very rarely getting over 40, but they may be sending them more frequently, like fewer, but more frequently. So my speculation is, and I'm sorry to repeat myself this morning, is that they are sending probably as many as they can. I think Operation Spiderweb, and we've heard this, actually it really hit their strategic bombers. So the planes that send these missiles have been taken out, and you can't rebuild 295s and 162s or whatever anymore. So that's a real problem for the Russians. Then in terms of the naval vessels and the submarines and ships that were operating out of Sevastopol, they used to get loaded up in Sevastopol, fly out into the sail out into the Black Sea, and then fire off those cruise missiles. But actually, they've been moved out from Sevastopol because Sevastopol was absolutely hammered. And they lost a load of ships, went to Novorossiysk, but they couldn't load cruise missiles onto the submarines and ships because the loading mechanism was still in Sevastopol. And then it took something like 6 months to get that loading mechanism down. And I reckon, and this is total speculation, but I reckon, because I would do this, if you've got a static loading mechanism on the dock side in Novorossiysk, that's just going to be target number one for the Ukrainians. And we know they have struck the Novorossiysk docks, right, previously. So I'm wondering whether they are just less able to fire cruise missiles from the Black Sea Fleet and less able to fire these missiles from the airplanes, which means that they are firing them with fewer airplanes. So they're probably taking off more often, but able to fire fewer missiles, which is what explains that, right? So big gap, and then firing fewer but more often. So they can make as many as they like, but if they don't have the means with which to fire them, then they're going to be in trouble. So alongside making more missiles, they're going to have to make more things to fire them. So the enemy also plans to produce Su-30, Su-34s, Su-35s, Su-57. This is like the latest generation fighter. 57 of these units. T-90M tanks, 250 units. BMP-3s and BTR-82As, 1,110 units. Artillery systems, 365. Wow, they're actually going to be making artillery. Tank production will focus on T-80, T-90, T-14 Armata. The Kremlin also plans active construction of the coalition, Mr. Malva, Hyacinth, and Magnolia artillery systems. And Russia seeks to increase the share of unmanned systems on the battlefield to 40%. I mean, that sounds wonderful. This is coming from the GUR, but like, will they have the ability to do that? They seem to be struggling at the moment, or as though some people say they're stockpiling newly made stuff. I don't know why they would do that. I don't know. I don't know if that's just complete fanciful thinking from the Russians, or whether they do have the ability to ramp up production. So Russia intends to produce all these things: 2,500 guided, precision guided missiles, including Iskander ballistic and cruise types. Of course, they can send Iskanders from ground launch systems. And Kinjal hypersonic missiles, according to Vadim Skibitsky, deputy chief of the HUR. So he noted that Russia is focusing on extending missile range, accuracy, and warhead capacity, preparing not only for the war against Ukraine, but also for potential conflict with NATO by 2030. There you go. Yeah, that could be a concern for the Ukrainians. Now, this video, I love watching people take things like sledgehammers and axes to things that go bang. I mean, I would never do this, but they obviously know what they're doing. Here you've got, I've got to turn the sound off because you don't have the sound. It just blasts my ears. He's just like, I've got an axe. I know. I'll just smash this Shahed drone open. I'd just be like, yeah, I know it's probably not going to blow it up, but really, you can do that. I'm going to stand over there. Anyway, there's a warhead that he was smacking an axe near. I don't know how the triggers, the fuses work on these things. Probably not axe triggered, but anyway, not something I'd do too often. Now, Russians have showcased the RD-8 drone, a mothership drone, and an aerial relay that can reportedly be controlled via LTE or Starlink. It can also reportedly intercept other drones and engage ground targets, says War Translated. So important, controlled via Starlink. This is where, and that's what the drone looks like. This is where people are getting pretty upset again with Mr. Musk. Sorry, I kept thinking that German chap. What was his name? Guy from Second World War. Oh yeah, Hitler. Russia's showcased their new drone. It uses Starlink. Elon Musk should have all US government contracts terminated, says this source, immediately, and all assets seized. He's still a Russian asset. You know what? I wouldn't disagree too much with that sentiment. The Defense Express has reported that Russians have also developed a fiber optic naval drone capable of performing various tasks. It can act as a kamikaze, carry FPV drones, and attack Ukrainian naval drones. Potential targets include Mykolaiv, Odessa, and Kherson. So we already know that a larger naval drone sunk that ship or did something to that ship in the estuary near Odessa, in the Danube estuary, wasn't it? Which is phenomenally bad news for the Ukrainians to get that far and have that naval drone, that USV, undetected and hit a really important reconnaissance ship jam-packed full of incredibly expensive instruments and whatnot. That's an absolute shocker for the Ukrainians, that was. Now they're working on fiber optic USVs as well. A fiber optic naval drone. I mean, a fiber optic drone is never going to go to Mykolaiv, Odessa, and Kherson. You would have to have 500-kilometer fiber optics. I don't know quite how that works, but anyway, they are developing things, shall we say? Now, this is the Russians unveiling a ground robot equipped with a demining laser, reportedly effective up to 150 meters. In practice, they often rely on disposable sappers at the front, but the development is still notable. I mean, they are coming up with stuff, the Russians. They're not just sitting idle. Here is a new development in the form of a laser that can take out a mine. Here, whatever it is sitting on the side of a mound, and that is apparently taking it out, and then having it go at something else as well. There it is, lasering. We really are living in the 21st century these days, aren't we? So that is that. Something else to worry about. Those are some burnt up mines. And then finally, talking about drones, just not to do with Ukraine, but is people learning from Ukraine? I'm sure the Chinese are taking what they're observing from Ukraine, and that is being used to influence their design. The Chinese are actively trying to adopt the experience of war and are already beginning to use various methods of delivering cargo to units on the front line during exercises using drones and robot dogs. I've seen a whole bunch of robot dogs being used by the Chinese in exercises. Some of them look pretty impressive. This is an interesting one. I've not seen one like this before, which appears to be a robot dog on wheels. Evidently giving it the best of both worlds. So I guess if it can lock its wheels, it can use them as feet when it needs to. Otherwise, it can roll. Here we've got a larger quadcopter, huge rotors on that bad boy, delivering stuff to the front line. So Chinese are developing stuff, and you know that the Chinese would just be ramping up production of whatever they are designing. You know, their shipbuilding at the moment is frightening compared to the rest of the world. Whether it was interesting now, I spoke to one of the dads from one of my boys' football. He's in the Royal Navy, and he had just come back from going around the sort of Indian Ocean area, going to different countries. And basically the way our Navy gets used, I've talked about this previously, referring to Smedley Butlers, is that our navies, if you ask the average Joe on the street, they'll probably think our armed forces go around the world just policing the world. But they don't. Or when they do police the world, and I've changed my opinion, and you've heard me say this 100 times, but I've changed my opinion from the kind of Trey Parker, Matt Stone, Team America World Police, this riff on the Americans that they just go around the world policing the world and getting involved in different conflicts to say stop doing that. And of course it's very attractive, but it's not what really happens. Like the Americans and any other country get involved in conflicts in the world if it's in their best interest to do so. So there's always a geopolitical or an economic calculus going on there. So I always give the example of, like, why did we go and bomb Tripoli? Like, why did we get involved in Libya and Iraq and not Zimbabwe? Why did we do nothing about Robert Mugabe, but we did stuff about Colonel Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein? What did Libya and Iraq have that Zimbabwe didn't have? Freaking oil, right? Natural resources. And so Zimbabwe has nothing that we particularly would make it worth our while intervening in on behalf of, I don't know, farmers there and whatnot. Because, Zimbabwe, Libya and Iraq. So our armed forces go and our governments pick and choose where we get involved around the world. So like I've said a million times, Ukraine is one of these rare instances where it is such a clear moral calculus as well as a geopolitical strategic calculus. So these two perfectly align. I wouldn't be so obsessed with this war if it wasn't completely morally speaking to me. Like, it's a black and white moral calculus there, and it's an obvious geopolitical calculus as well. Like, you don't want dictatorships and autocracy and Russian autocracy and influence to start spreading at the edge of Europe. So morality and strategy are perfectly in sync. Doesn't always happen. So, like, what's going on with what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya might not be so strong morally, And then you've got like the Houthis in Yemen. Like, why didn't we support Yemen? Why were we like selling arms to Saudi Arabia? So that's where morality was going in that direction, and geopolitical strategizing and the economy, making money out of arms sales and whatnot, goes in that direction. So our nations go and do things that are in the best interest of armed forces go and do things that are in the best interest of our nations. And if you go and look, and I did a whole video on this, and I've written articles on this. If you go to for example, the UK government's website, and you look at the armed forces and what the remit for the armed forces is, it's about looking after our nation's national interests. And what are our national interests? Well, surely, what does the government want to do? So this is where you go back to, what's the point of the government? Okay, it needs to look after the security of its people first and foremost. So you have to be secure, because if you're not secure, you'll die, right? And if you die, you can't pay taxes. So you need to be secure. And then you need to be working, and we need to be getting money in. So we need tax from our people here, but we also need a prosperous economy, which means we're going to need to get resources from outside the world. We live in a global society where the UK, for example, doesn't mine rare earth metals and this and that. So we need to get stuff in from all over the world. Now, in the 1700s, our navy went around the Atlantic Ocean stopping pirates. Their job was protecting trade. That happened in the 1700s in the Atlantic, and it's happening in the 2020s now in the Red Sea, where we're stopping pirates, or around Somalia, we stop pirates from, and the Houthis from impeding our trade going through the Red Sea, through the Suez Canal, into the Mediterranean, connecting the world. So our best interests are our economic interests, and a political interest will lock in our economic prosperity. So going back, sorry, this is a long digression. My mate was on a Royal Naval vessel, and the job of this vessel, it wasn't like a huge battleship or anything, a huge frigate. I think it was a smaller, kind of not patrol boat, but a smaller vessel, and it basically was just going around the Indian Ocean and that part of the world, visiting different nations and being part of our political front line. And it would go to these different ports, and then they would have the Royal Navy would have, or kind of with the diplomats, would have meetings with all the local kind of countries wherever they're visiting. That they were doing diplomacy in every port. They were doing diplomacy, and they'd be schmoozing and schmoozing and schmoozing. And that was our naval vessel, not being used to go and blow pirates up, and not being used to go and stop a war over there, but actually being going and doing diplomacy around that part of the world. And it's fascinating speaking to him about what he'd get up to and where they'd go and who they'd be speaking to. And he also said, we spoke to a lot of nations. So this is linking back to Chinese shipbuilding. There is a security. I'm doing the Donald Trump weave, right? And he was saying that we would go to nations that have bought these naval ships off the Chinese, and they'd be like, "This is a really shit ship. We wish we had bought it off you," type thing, or from the West or whatever. So, although the Chinese are out producing the hell out of everyone else in terms of vessels, naval vessels, at least from that anecdote, they aren't always the very best. But mass has its own quality, right? So the Americans are very worried about the sheer scale of Chinese shipbuilding, as is probably most people around the world. But anyway, there's a kind of like a long digression about what is the point of our armed forces. Don't just think. I mean, it's really easy to think that they're just world police. Oh, why are we going in? Like, American isolationists will complain about the US involvement around the world, saying, what are we doing going and getting involved around the world doing this and that? And sometimes there is an element of US imperialism, economic imperialism. So if you want to go and watch a couple of really good documentaries, one, it's quite old now, is The War on Democracy by John Pilger. You can imagine where that's coming from. And a great Canadian documentary, The Corporation. Both will give you a sense of kind of an American economic imperialism, as well as an old school imperialism of getting involved in the democratic elections of particularly Southern American nations, because actually we don't want you to vote in a socialist because actually we want our influence there and we want to the free market to spread to your country so we can get economic gains and blah, blah, blah. But the point is, you're getting involved in other nations, not for shits and giggles and not to protect people particularly. If you are protecting them, it's because it's in your best interest to protect them. So Ukraine, like the reason why the US is and has been supporting Ukraine, although it isn't at the moment, because I don't think it realizes its geopolitical importance or it's become too isolationist. You're protecting Ukraine because actually it benefits the US to protect Ukraine. That's why you do it. And it's moral, but that's not the primary reason. So anyway, you know, there are times when we can argue that was the US or any other country shouldn't have got involved there. You know, you can make arguments about Afghanistan and so on and so forth, but they aren't going around the world. No nation is going around the world doing stuff for like just because it's nice, just because it's charitable. We might do humanitarian efforts in earthquake zones and stuff like that. That's where our armed forces are doing purely humanitarian stuff. Otherwise, it's part of our geopolitical strategy or international foreign policy strategy. And you pick and choose where you're going to get involved in the world. You don't get involved everywhere. It's here and it's there and it's there because of A, B, and C. Right, that's enough for me banging on. Yeah, geopolitics for dummies. But yeah, but I think, you know, you still hear so much of this, you know, world police idea that this really, I think now, naive idea that would just, you know, it's all for the benefit. Sometimes it might be soft power, sometimes it's hard power, sometimes it's economic power, but it's always about some kind of power and conserving your trade routes and conserving your power, your base of power. And yeah. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you very much for being here, guys. I really appreciate it. Zimbabwe is loaded with natural resources, yeah, but not the natural resources that I mean, I think there are some. There's some mining, I think, to be done there, but not the sorts of ones where you would send in. Russia are fine with doing that. So Russia are happy to send in, particularly into Africa, private military companies to go and provide security and take those kind of resources. But when we send our warships and you know, Zimbabwe is not the sort of place that it just, there wasn't enough there. Clearly, the calculation clearly, self-evidently, wasn't strong enough for us to get involved there. There wasn't enough return on investment. It's literally return on investment. It's going to cost us this much to send ships there and to do this, and this many people might die, and that might cost this much to our PR, and so therefore we're not going to do it, or we are going to do it, or we're going to do it in a very limited way. So Sierra Leone, the UK got involved there for particular, you know, strategic reasons. But again, you know, it will be for strategic reasons. It's not for shits and giggles, right? It's too expensive to do that. You know, anyway, that really is enough for me. Thank you very much. It's been a longer one than I was expecting. I do need a nap, but I can't. I've got to go and pick up my car and all sorts. Right, little whiskey shot. JP, you can come back to our private debate on Angela Rayner now. I know I'm looking and I've got 3 unread messages from you, Mark. Can't we just drink port together and be happy? Like, can't we do that? I'll get back to that, mate. But not for a good couple of hours because I've got to shoot off now. So yes, and somebody saying Rick the Ukraine is also live. You can visit him when I finish. Yes, please do. He's a good lad. I haven't spoken to him for ages, actually. Take care, everybody, and I will get back to you soon with a mapping update. But I need JR to just help me out there because there are some issues. I don't think it's my fault either. I think Syriac Maps has got a problem with its map, and that kind of screws up my entire way of doing it. And I need Syriac Maps to map it correctly because actually it shows you where they think the Russians are, whereas everything else is grey zone, and it's quite important to get that in the Prokrovsk area. Go and check out Scruffy Tales, and please check out Car for Ukraine. I think it's linked in the description below. Thank you for Cheryl, who's such an amazing mod, for always reminding us of the campaign. Cheers, big ears. Thank you, JP. I am Sweden. I am support Ukraine. Oh, I need to find that original tweet. I really need to. I think it was deleted. If anyone can find the original tweet of I think it was something like I am Britain and I am support Ukraine, and it was clearly a bot tweet, a troll tweet. If you can find the original one and link it to me, I love that. Anyway, that was a joke we had many moons ago. I am Britain and I am support Ukraine. Take care, everybody. Toodle pips.